The world, as Izuku Midoriya would come to learn at the tender age of 4, was not created equal. It was a lesson delivered not in the fire and brimstone of a battlefield, nor in the dramatic clash of heroes and villains that he so fervently watched on his computer screen. Instead, it was delivered in a sterile, white-walled room smelling of rubbing alcohol and cheap peppermint candy. The harsh, fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, indifferent hum, casting long, sharp shadows across the linoleum floor. Dr. Tsubasa sat across from Izuku and his mother, Inko. The doctor was a rotund man with a bushy mustache and round spectacles that caught the harsh glare of the ceiling lights. He held a black and white X-ray in his hands, a picture of Izuku's small, fragile foot. To anyone else, it was just a medical scan. To Izuku, it was an execution order for his dreams. "You should probably give it up," the doctor said. The words were blunt, carrying no malice, only the heavy, immovable weight of medical fact. Izuku's world stopped turning. The all-might action figure in his hand, a symbol of everything he wanted to be, a hero who saved everyone with a fearless smile, suddenly felt incredibly heavy. The plastic slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the linoleum. The sound echoed in the small room like a gunshot. "Give it up?" Inko Midoriya repeated, her voice trembling. She leaned forward, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "But doctor, isn't there some mistake? The other kids in his kindergarten class have already started showing signs of their quirks." "Izuku, he's just a late bloomer, right?" Dr. Tsubasa sighed, tapping a pen against the desk. He pointed the tip toward the X-ray illuminated on the light board. "It's a matter of evolutionary biology, Mrs. Midoriya. When superpowers first began appearing, researchers found a link between the absence of a certain joint in the pinky toe and the manifestation of a quirk. It's a sign of the next stage of human evolution. But as you can see here, Izuku has 2 joints in his pinky toe. He hasn't evolved. He is exactly as humans were centuries ago. He will never develop a quirk." The ride home was a blur of muted colors and silent tears. Rain had begun to fall, tracing slow, winding paths down the window of the train. Izuku pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his wide, emerald-green eyes staring blankly at the passing city. Tokyo was a metropolis of miracles. Everywhere he looked, he saw the extraordinary. A woman making umbrellas float with a flick of her wrist, a man with a head made of roaring exhaust pipes, a hero leaping across rooftops in the distance. The world was a vibrant, moving comic book, and Izuku had just been told he was relegated to being part of the blank, white background. That evening, the Midoriya apartment was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the repetitive, booming laughter of the symbol of peace emanating from the computer monitor in Izuku's dark room. "Fear not, citizens!" "Why?" "Because I am here!" The video was old, grainy footage of All Might's debut in America. It was Izuku's favorite video in the world. He had watched it thousands of times, studying the hero's posture, his confidence, his unbreakable spirit. Usually, the video filled Izuku with an uncontrollable warmth, a desire to rush out into the world and help someone. Tonight, the laughter sounded distant, hollow. The door creaked open. Inko stood in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy. She looked at her son, bathed in the blue light of the monitor, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "Mom." Izuku's voice was small, choked with tears he hadn't yet let fall. Can I still be a hero? Even if I don't have a quirk?" He turned to look at her, his face crumpled in sheer, desperate agony. He needed her to say yes. He needed the woman who loved him more than anything to tell him that the doctor was wrong, that the world was wrong, that a quirk didn't make a hero, the heart did. Instead, Inko broke. She fell to her knees, crossing the room in a desperate scramble, and pulled Izuku into a fiercely tight embrace. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she wailed, tears soaking into the fabric of his favorite All Might onesie. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." No, Izuku thought, his own tears finally spilling over, hot and bitter against his cheeks. "No, Mom. That's not what I needed you to say." He cried until he couldn't breathe, until his small lungs ached and his vision swam. When sleep finally claimed him, it was not a peaceful descent, but a sudden plummet into darkness. He expected to dream of the doctor's cold eyes, or his mother's weeping, or the mocking laughter of his classmates. Instead, he dreamed of fire. The transition was jarring. One moment, Izuku was a heartbroken 4-year-old boy in a dark bedroom. The next, he was standing in the middle of a sun-drenched courtyard. The world around him was hyperreal, far more vivid than any dream he had ever experienced. The sky was an impossible, brilliant shade of cerulean. The air smelled of cherry blossoms, dry earth, and ash. It was a comforting smell, like a hearth in the dead of winter. Izuku looked down at his hands. They were small, but they didn't feel like his own. The sleeves covering his arms were not his all-might pajamas, but a crisp, black uniform, covered by a white haori patterned with a gradient of brilliant yellow and fiery red at the hem. It looked like the edges of a flickering flame. He heard the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of wood striking wood. Turning, Izuku saw a man. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed an aura of such intense, radiating warmth that Izuku instinctively took a step toward him. The man had wild, unruly hair, golden yellow with vivid, crimson-red streaks at the tips, much like the haori he wore. He was wielding a wooden training sword, bringing it down with terrifying speed and precision. "Keep your core tight," the man suddenly bellowed. His voice was incredibly loud, startling the birds in the nearby trees, but it wasn't angry. It was booming, jovial, overflowing with life. Breath is the foundation of the sword. It is the foundation of life. If you do not breathe deeply enough, the fire will not reach your limbs. Again, Izuku realized the man was speaking to a younger boy, a boy who looked strikingly like the man, with the same fiery hair and intense eyes. Izuku wanted to speak, to ask where he was, to ask if this was a hero agency. But when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. He was a phantom, an observer tethered to this strange, beautiful world. Suddenly the tall man stopped. He lowered his wooden sword and turned his head. His eyes, wide, striking, burning with an unshakable inner light, seemed to pierce right through the veil of the dream. He looked directly at Izuku. A massive, brilliant smile broke across the man's face. It was a smile that rivaled All Might's, not in its performative reassurance, but in its absolute, unwavering certainty. "Set your heart ablaze." Izuku woke with a gasp. He bolted upright in his bed, his chest heaving. The bedroom was bathed in the pale, cool light of morning. The video on his computer had long since finished, the screen black. The scent of cherry blossoms and ash was gone, replaced by the mundane smell of Inko's cooking drifting in from the kitchen. Izuku placed a small hand over his chest. Beneath his ribs, his heart was beating with a frantic, powerful rhythm. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. He felt strange. The crushing, suffocating despair from the doctor's office was still there, a heavy stone in his stomach, but something else had been planted beside it. A tiny, glowing ember. He didn't know who the man in the dream was. He didn't know what the strange clothing meant, or what setting his heart ablaze entailed. But as Izuku swung his legs over the edge of his bed, he felt an inexplicable compulsion. He stood up straight, pulling his shoulders back. He took a deep breath, deeper than he usually did, filling his small lungs until they expanded fully, and exhaled slowly through his nose. For a fleeting second, his skin felt pleasantly warm. "I'm going to be a hero," Izuku whispered to the empty room. The tremor in his voice was gone. If the realization of his quirklessness was a sudden earthquake, the aftermath was a slow, grinding erosion. News spread quickly through the kindergarten class. In a world where the extraordinary was the baseline, lacking a quirk was not just a medical anomaly, it was a social death sentence. Izuku became an outcast, a relic of a bygone era. No one took the news harder, or reacted more aggressively, than Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was the undisputed king of the playground. His quirk, explosion, had manifested with the violence and spectacle of a fireworks display. He was loud, aggressive, and fiercely proud. He had always seen himself and Izuku as a duo, with Katsuki as the undeniable star and Izuku as the loyal follower. But a star needs planets to orbit it, not a speck of dust. It happened near the sandbox, a week after the doctor's appointment. Katsuki was showing off, popping small, crackling explosions in his palms. The other children were gathered around him, their eyes wide with awe. Izuku stood on the periphery, watching. He still admired Katsuki. He still thought his friend was amazing. "Hey, Izuku!" Katsuki called out, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Did you finally get your quirk?" "Let me guess, it's crying, right?" The other children giggled. Izuku felt his cheeks burn, but he didn't look away. "No, Kaken," the doctor said. "I'm not going to get one." The popping in Katsuki's hands stopped. The smirk vanished, replaced by a deep, indignant scowl. To Katsuki, Izuku's quirklessness wasn't a tragedy. It was a personal insult. How dared this weak, fragile thing pretend they could ever stand on the same stage? "Not going to get one." Katsuki marched over, shoving Izuku hard in the chest. Izuku stumbled backward, falling into the sand. "You're empty. You're nothing. You're a Deku. That's what you are." The kanji for your name can be read as Deku. It means someone who can't do anything at all. "That's not true," Izuku protested, scrambling to his feet, dusting the sand off his shorts. "Yeah? Prove it." Katsuki lunged, his palm sparking. He struck Izuku on the shoulder. The small explosion wasn't enough to cause serious harm, but it burned, knocking Izuku off his feet once again. Izuku lay on the ground, his shoulder stinging. He looked up at Katsuki, expecting to feel fear. He expected to cry. That was what he usually did, but as he looked at Katsuki's angry, contorted face, Izuku felt a strange disconnect. The ember in his chest flickered. The memory of the man with the fiery hair surfaced in his mind. "The strong are meant to protect the weak," a voice echoed in his head, entirely unbidden. Izuku didn't cry. He looked at Katsuki with a calm, wide-eyed stare. It wasn't defiance, and it certainly wasn't submission. It was an unnerving, almost pitying look. Izuku felt, in a way he couldn't articulate, that Katsuki's anger was a waste of energy. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Katsuki yelled, furious that he hadn't elicited the usual tears. "Stop looking at me, Deku." "I'm sorry, Kaken," Izuku said softly, getting up slowly. "I don't mean to make you mad." He turned and walked away, leaving Katsuki fuming in the sandbox. Izuku rubbed his shoulder. It hurt, but as he took a deep, measured breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the stinging sensation seemed to fade, replaced by a comforting, internal heat. From that day on, the dynamic was set. Katsuki the tormentor, Izuku the victim. But to Izuku, the reality felt slightly skewed. He didn't feel like a victim. He felt like he was waiting for something inside him to wake up. Years bled into one another. The world continued to spin, heroes continued to fight, and Izuku Midoriya continued to grow older, marked by the ever-present label of quirkless. By the time he was 10, Izuku had developed habits that his mother found endearing, if slightly bizarre. He had an obsession with heroes, filling notebooks with meticulous sketches and analyses of their quirks, fighting styles, and public personas. This part made sense. The other habits did not. Izuku ate with a voraciousness that defied his scrawny frame. When Inko placed a plate of katsudon or sweet potatoes in front of him, Izuku would take a bite, his eyes would widen to an almost comical degree, and he would shout, "You may I!" Delicious, with a booming volume that rattled the kitchen windows. He didn't just say it once, he said it with nearly every bite, chewing with an intense, joyful ferocity. He also sat with perfect, rigid posture. Whether he was at his desk at school, eating dinner, or watching television, his back was arrow straight, his hands resting on his knees. And then, there was the breathing. Inko often caught him sitting on the balcony, his eyes closed, breathing in deep, rhythmic patterns. Sometimes, on particularly cold winter mornings, she could swear she saw the air around him shimmering with a faint, localized heat, like a mirage over asphalt in the summer. When she asked him about it, he just smiled brightly, a wide, unblinking smile that sometimes unsettled her with its sheer intensity, and said he was practicing his focus. But beneath the cheerful exterior, Izuku was fighting a nightly war. As he grew older, the dreams evolved. They were no longer just the sunlit courtyard and the man with the fiery hair teaching sword forms. The dreams darkened. They became heavy, oppressive, and stained with blood. It always started the same way. The rhythmic, deafening clack-clack-clack of wheels on iron rails. He was on a train. An old, steam-powered locomotive tearing through an endless, pitch-black night. The air inside the passenger cars was stifling, reeking of coal, fear, and a metallic scent that Izuku instinctively knew was blood. In these dreams, Izuku wasn't just a phantom observer. He was the man with the fiery hair. He felt the weight of a sword in his hand, the hilt wrapped in rough leather, the guard shaped like a flame. He felt the terrifying, agonizing strain on his muscles, a physical exhaustion so profound it made his bones ache, and he felt the presence of the demon. That was the only word for it. It wasn't a villain in a flashy costume. It was a creature of absolute, primal nightmare. It looked like a young man with pale skin covered in thick, jagged blue stripes. Its eyes were glowing yellow, the irises inscribed with kanji, upper rank 3. The demon moved with a speed and ferocity that made All Might look sluggish. In the dream, Izuku fought it. He swung his sword, unleashing waves of roaring, blinding fire that illuminated the dark forest around the derailed train. Become a demon, Kyojuro! The striped creature would laugh, its fist moving in a blur, shattering ribs, tearing through flesh. Become a demon, and we can fight for eternity. You are strong. Do not die as a fragile human. I will fulfill my duty. Izuku would hear his own voice roar back, a voice that was his, yet not his. It was the voice of Kyojuro Rengoku. I will not let anyone here die. Growing old and dying is the beauty of the fleeting creature called a human being. Because they grow old, because they die, they are tremendous, lovable, and noble. The dream always culminated in the same horrific climax. The demon's fist, glowing with an otherworldly blue light, plunging through his solar plexus. The agonizing, fiery explosion of pain, the realization of impending death. But even as the light faded, the feeling that overwhelmed Izuku wasn't fear. It was an absolute, unyielding resolve. He had protected them. He had done his duty. Izuku would wake up screaming, tangling in his sweat-soaked sheets. His chest would throb with a phantom pain so intense, he would clutch his stomach, gasping for air. It took him hours to regulate his breathing, to convince his mind that there was no hole in his chest, that the striped demon wasn't hiding in the shadows of his room. These nightmares left him exhausted, but they also forged something unbreakable within his mind. By the time he entered Aldera Junior High, Izuku Midoriya was an anomaly. He was quirkless, mocked, and physically frail, yet he carried himself with an internal dignity that confused and infuriated his bullies. Bakugo, in particular, could not stand it. What are you smiling at, Deku? Bakugo would snarl, slamming his hands onto Izuku's desk, small explosions singeing the wood. Izuku would look up from his hero analysis notebook, his expression perfectly calm, his eyes bright. I'm not smiling at anything specific, Kaken. It's just a beautiful day. Don't give me that crap. You look down on me. You've always looked down on me. Bakugo would yell, his insecurity masked by rage. I don't look down on you, Kaken. You have a wonderful quirk. You're going to be a great hero, Izuku would reply, entirely earnest. And it was true. Izuku didn't harbor an ounce of resentment toward Bakugo. How could he? In the face of the horrors he faced every night in his dreams, Bakugo's temper tantrums felt like the flailing of a lost child. Izuku felt an older brother's instinct to guide him, though he knew Bakugo would never accept it. The disconnect between Izuku's fragile reality and his blazing subconscious was a powder keg. It was only a matter of time before a spark set it off. The spark ignited on a humid Tuesday afternoon during their second year of junior high. The final bell had rung, and the sky outside was bruised with heavy, purple clouds, threatening a summer storm. Izuku had stayed behind to finish organizing his notes on a recent fight between the pro-hero Kamui Woods and a villain with a gigantification quirk. As he packed his yellow backpack and stepped out into the empty hallway, he heard the unmistakable sound of a scuffle coming from the rear stairwell. He heard a sharp yelp, followed by the familiar, cruel laughter of Bakugo's two lackeys, a boy with elongated, glowing fingers, and another with leathery, bat-like wings. Come on, man, just hand over the money. It's an advance on Bakugo's Hero Agency Fund, the boy with the glowing fingers sneered. Izuku rounded the corner. In the shadow of the stairwell, Bakugo stood leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, an expression of bored disdain on his face. His two lackeys had cornered a first-year student. The boy was small, trembling, clutching a meager wallet to his chest. I don't have much, the first year stammered, tears pricking his eyes. Then we'll take what you have, the winged boy said, stepping forward, raising a fist. Izuku didn't think. The analytical part of his brain, the part that knew he was quirkless, the part that knew Bakugo could incinerate him, was instantly silenced. The ember in his chest, the one that had been quietly glowing for 10 years, flared. I will not let anyone here die, the words from his dreams echoed in his skull. Izuku moved. Before the winged boy could bring his fist down, a hand clamped onto his wrist. The grip was like an iron vice. The boy turned, startled, to see Izuku Midoriya standing between him and the first year. Izuku's posture was rigid. His feet were planted shoulder-width apart. His green eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely devoid of fear. You should not extort money from your juniors, Izuku declared. His voice was incredibly loud, booming through the narrow stairwell, echoing off the concrete walls. It was a voice that commanded attention. A true hero protects the weak. They do not prey upon them. Release him at once. Dead silence fell over the stairwell. The two lackeys stared at Izuku as if he had suddenly sprouted a second head. Behind them, Bakugo pushed himself off the wall, his crimson eyes narrowing into slits. Deku, Bakugo growled, the word dripping with venom. What the hell do you think you're doing? I am stopping a mugging, Kakin. Izuku replied cheerfully, though his grip on the winged boy's wrist did not loosen. He turned his head slightly to the terrified first year. Go! Run to the teacher's lounge. You will be safe there. The first year didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up the stairs and disappeared. The winged boy yanked his arm free, rubbing his wrist, looking at Izuku with a mix of anger and confusion. The hell is wrong with you, quirkless loser? You think you're a hero now? He thinks he's better than us, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low octave. Small sparks began to pop in his palms, illuminating the dim stairwell with sharp, orange flashes. He's always looking at me with those damn eyes. Like he's pitying me. Bakugo took a step forward. I've had enough of you, Deku. It's time someone taught you your place. Izuku didn't back down. He didn't raise his hands to defend himself. He just stood there, his back straight, looking at Bakugo. Violence will not prove your strength, Kakin. True strength comes from the heart. Shut up! Bakugo roared. He lunged. It wasn't a playful shove. It was a vicious, right-hook explosion aimed squarely at Izuku's chest. The blast hit Izuku with the force of a speeding truck. The heat scorched his school uniform, tearing the fabric. The kinetic impact lifted him off his feet, sending him flying backward. He slammed violently into the concrete wall of the stairwell. His head cracked against the stone, and he crumpled to the floor. Pain, hot and blinding, erupted through Izuku's body. He gasped, but the air wouldn't enter his lungs. His vision blurred, swimming with dark spots. He heard the muffled laughter of the lackeys and the heavy footsteps of Bakugo approaching. Get up, Deku, Bakugo sneered, standing over him. Come on. Show me that true strength you're always muttering about. Izuku tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead. His chest was screaming. A rib was definitely cracked. He coughed, a thin trail of saliva and a drop of blood escaping his lips. Is this it? Izuku thought, the darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. Am I just weak? Suddenly, the cold concrete of the stairwell faded. The smell of ozone and sweat was replaced by the smell of ash and blood. Izuku wasn't in a junior high school anymore. He was lying on the shattered, splintered wood of a derailed train car. The sky above was pitch black. Standing over him wasn't Katsuki Bakugo. It was the striped demon, Akaza, his fists dripping with blood. You are dying, Kyojuro, the demon said, its voice a horrific, echoing purr. Your ribs are broken. Your internal organs are wounded. This is the tragic fate of a human. If you were a demon, these wounds would heal in an instant. Just say it. Say you will become a demon. Izuku looked up at the glowing yellow eyes. The phantom pain in his solar plexus flared to an agonizing crescendo. He was dying. He had failed. No. From the depths of his soul, a warmth began to rise. It started as an ember, fueled by the memories of his mother, the memory of the terrified first-year student, and 1,000 lifetimes of duty. The ember caught fire. In the dream, Kyojuro Rengoku forced himself to his feet. He gripped his broken, battered katana. He took a breath. In the stairwell, Izuku Midoriya forced himself to his hands and knees. He gripped the cold concrete. He took a breath. Total concentration. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was an instinct older than quirks, older than modern society. It was a technique burned into his very DNA by a soul that refused to yield. Izuku inhaled sharply. The breath was incredibly deep, expanding his lungs to their absolute physical limit. He visualized the oxygen entering his bloodstream, traveling to every cell, every muscle fiber. He pictured the air not as a gas, but as a roaring, golden fire. The effect was instantaneous. To Bakugo and his lackeys, Izuku simply took a deep breath. But to Izuku, the world exploded into terrifying, brilliant clarity. The pain in his ribs vanished, replaced by an intense, searing heat. His heart rate skyrocketed, thumping with a rhythm so powerful it felt like a drum beating in his ears. The sluggishness in his limbs evaporated. His blood felt like it was boiling, coursing through his veins with the force of a raging river. What is he doing? The boy with glowing fingers whispered, taking a step back. Bakugo frowned. The temperature in the enclosed stairwell was rising rapidly. The air around Izuku seemed to waver and distort, like the air above a hot stove. A faint, barely audible whistling sound emanated from Izuku's lips as he exhaled a stream of scorching hot air. Izuku stood up. He didn't stumble. He didn't waver. He rose with a smooth, fluid grace that defied his broken body. He stood tall, his shoulders pulled back. His school uniform was scorched, his green hair messy, but his presence was colossal. He slowly opened his eyes. The soft, emerald green was still there, but it was illuminated from within by a fierce, uncompromising fire. The synchronization was complete. Izuku Midoriya did not disappear, but he was no longer just a timid, quirkless boy. The soul of the flame pillar, Kyojuro Rengoku, had fully awakened, merging flawlessly with the heroic heart of a boy who just wanted to save people. Izuku looked at Bakugo. He didn't look angry. He didn't look afraid. He smiled. It was a massive, beaming smile. It was radiant, joyous, and utterly terrifying. Kaken! Izuku bellowed. The sheer volume of his voice made Bakugo flinch, his hands instinctively coming up to guard his ears. That was a powerful strike. Your quirk is truly magnificent. Bakugo stared, his jaw slightly slack. What the hell are you talking about, Deku? Have you lost your damn mind? No! Izuku replied cheerfully, taking a step forward. The concrete beneath his sneaker cracked slightly. I have found my focus. I understand now. The burden of the strong is to protect the weak. If you misuse your power to harm others, I will be forced to stop you. Bakugo's shock quickly morphed back into explosive rage. Stop me? You're a quirkless nobody. I'll kill you. Bakugo launched himself forward, both palms extended, aiming to unleash a double-handed blast directly into Izuku's face. Izuku didn't flinch. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He saw the sweat on Bakugo's palms. He saw the sparks igniting in the sweat glands. With total concentration breathing coursing through his body, Izuku's kinetic vision and physical speed were pushed beyond standard human limits. He didn't need a sword right now. He just needed to subdue. Total concentration. Flame breathing. Izuku stepped into the attack, completely ignoring the danger. As Bakugo fired, Izuku moved his head a fraction of an inch, the explosive heat grazing his cheek, singeing his hair. At the same time, Izuku brought his right arm up in an arc, his hand flat. He didn't hit Bakugo. He merely parried him. Izuku's forearm slammed into Bakugo's wrists, deflecting the explosion upward. The blast scarred the ceiling of the stairwell, raining plaster down on them. Using the momentum of Bakugo's own lunge, Izuku pivoted gracefully on his heel, grabbed Bakugo by the collar of his uniform, and executed a flawless, sweeping judo throw. It wasn't a violent throw meant to injure. It was a controlled, masterful redirection of energy. Bakugo hit the floor flat on his back. The wind was knocked out of him in a sharp whoosh. He lay there, stunned, staring up at the scorched ceiling. The two lackeys shrieked and sprinted up the stairs, abandoning their leader without a second thought. Izuku stood over Bakugo. The heat radiating from his body was intense. He took another deep, rhythmic breath, the air whistling through his teeth, and the oppressive heat in the stairwell slowly began to dissipate. The frantic beating of his heart slowed to a steady, powerful rhythm. Bakugo groaned, struggling to sit up. He looked at Izuku, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning, unfamiliar sense of fear. What was that? Bakugo rasped, coughing. That wasn't, you don't have a quirk. That wasn't a quirk. You are correct. Izuku boomed, offering a hand to Bakugo. His wide smile never faltered. It is not a quirk. It is a breathing technique. An ancient art of pushing the human body past its limits. I remembered it just now. Bakugo stared at the offered hand as if it were a venomous snake. He slapped it away, scrambling to his feet, his pride bruised far more than his back. Shut up. You're lying. You've been hiding a quirk this whole time just to make me look like a fool. I'll kill you, Deku. I swear I'll kill you. Bakugo backed away, his hands sparking erratically, before he turned and bolted down the hallway, leaving Izuku alone in the stairwell. Izuku watched him go. He let out a long sigh, dropping his rigid posture slightly. He reached up and touched his chest. The cracked ribs still throbbed, but as long as he maintained his breathing, the pain was manageable, and his body would heal faster. He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer exhilaration of the power coursing through him. The memories in his head were a chaotic jumble. He was Izuku Midoriya, the 14-year-old fanba who lived with his mother and loved All Might. But he was also Kyojuro Rengoku, the flame Hashira, the man who had died defending a train full of innocents from upper rank 3. The two identities didn't fight each other. They merged, filling in each other's gaps. Izuku's analytical mind and tactical brilliance wrapped perfectly around Kyojuro's indomitable will, physical mastery, and blazing charisma. I have a lot of work to do, Izuku muttered to himself, his voice dropping back to a normal volume, though it still carried a deeper, more resonant timbre than before. He needed to train. Total concentration breathing was a massive strain on a body not conditioned for it. His lungs felt like they had been scraped with sandpaper, and his muscles were beginning to ache with lactic acid. If he was going to be a hero, if he was going to take the UA entrance exam in 10 months, he needed to forge his body into a vessel capable of wielding the flames without burning himself from the inside out. He also needed a weapon. A hero couldn't carry a live blade in this era, but perhaps a high-density training sword would suffice. Izuku picked up his yellow backpack, dusting off the plaster. He walked out of the school and into the humid summer evening. The storm clouds had broken, and the setting sun cast a brilliant, fiery glow over the city of Muzurifu. For the first time in 10 years, Izuku Midoriya didn't look at the heroes on the billboards with a sense of longing or despair. He looked at them as peers. He felt the phantom weight of a white and flame-patterned Hiyori resting on his shoulders. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the evening air, and smiled. His heart was ablaze. And the fire was only just beginning to spread. The human body is an engine, and oxygen is its fuel. For the average person, breathing is an involuntary, passive action, a quiet rhythm humming in the background of existence. But for Izuku Midoriya, breathing had become an active, all-consuming discipline. It had been several months since the incident in the stairwell, the day his memories of a man named Kyojuro Rengoku had forcefully synchronized with his own. Since then, Izuku's life had fundamentally shifted. He had not suddenly developed a quirk. His toes still possessed an extra joint, and his genetic makeup remained entirely mundane. But his spirit, his soul, had expanded, stretching to accommodate the blazing willpower of a Hashira. The first major change was his physical routine. Izuku realized quickly that total concentration breathing placed an unimaginable toll on an unconditioned body. The day after he had flipped Katsuki Bakugo onto his back, Izuku had woken up with a fever of 103 degrees, his muscles screaming and his blood vessels feeling as though they had been filled with hot sand. It was the biological backlash of forcing a 14-year-old quirkless frame to channel the power of a master swordsman. So, he began to build the vessel. Every morning, Long before the sun crested the horizon of Muzurifu, Izuku ran. He ran until his lungs burned, and when they burned, he forced himself to breathe deeper, drawing the oxygen into his expanding diaphragm, forcing his blood to carry it to his tearing muscle fibers. He lifted weights salvaged from the local junkyard. He practiced swinging a heavy, dense oak bakken, a wooden practice sword, 1,000 times a day in the small courtyard behind his apartment. The second major change was his appetite. To fuel the furnace of his body, Izuku needed calories. Massive, horrifying amounts of calories. Izuku, honey, are you sure you want another bowl? Inko Midoriya asked, her voice a mix of maternal fondness and genuine concern. She stood by the rice cooker, holding a large wooden paddle. Izuku sat perfectly straight at the small dining table, his school uniform neatly pressed. He held out his empty bowl with both hands, his emerald eyes wide and bright. Yes, please. Izuku boomed. His voice, once a timid, wavering squeak, now resonated with a deep, cheerful volume that frequently rattled the thin walls of their apartment. The sweet potatoes are exceptionally good today, mother. You may I. Inko flinched slightly at the volume but smiled, scooping a mountain of rice and glazed sweet potatoes into his bowl. You've been eating so much lately. And you're so loud. Did something happen at school? Nothing bad. Izuku replied, taking a massive bite of the food, chewing with intense, joyous vigor. He swallowed. You may I. I am simply preparing myself. To protect others, one must first ensure their own foundation is unshakable. Food is the bedrock of life, Inko sighed fondly, resting a hand on her cheek. Her son had changed. The crushing melancholy that had shadowed him since his diagnosis 10 years ago had completely evaporated. He was confident, excessively polite, and possessed a bizarre, unyielding optimism. She didn't understand this sudden obsession with swordsmanship or deep breathing, but seeing the radiant smile on his face, a smile that looked like it could melt the winter snow, was enough for her. Just make sure you don't be late for school, she said, handing him his yellow backpack. I will be exactly on time. Have a wonderful day, mother. With a deep, 90-degree bow, Izuku marched out the door, his posture rigid, his heart beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. Aldera Junior High was a hive of teenage anxiety and rampant ego, primarily dominated by the explosive presence of Katsuki Bakugo. It was the final year of middle school, and the looming shadow of high school applications hung over the classroom. The homeroom teacher stood at the front, a stack of papers in his hand. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures, the teacher said, sighing. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? He threw the stack of papers into the air. The classroom erupted into a cacophony of cheers as students showed off their quirks, elongating fingers, small water spouts, and minor levitation. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. But using your powers at school is against the rules, sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. The class immediately turned on him, shouting insults, but Bakugo just laughed, small explosions crackling in his palms. Bring it on, extras! I aced the mock test. I'm the only one here with the stuff to get into UA High School. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero. Oh, right, the teacher said, looking down at his clipboard. Midoriya, you wanted to go to UA too, didn't you? The classroom fell dead silent. Then, they erupted into laughter. In the past, this was the moment Izuku would shrink into his chair, hiding his face in his arms, trembling as the mocking words washed over him. He would mutter excuses, trying to make himself as small as possible. Today, however, Izuku did not shrink. He sat at his desk, his back arrow straight, his hands resting firmly on his knees. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look ashamed. He looked around the laughing classroom with a wide, bright, almost uncomfortably intense smile. Yes! Izuku shouted, his booming voice cutting through the laughter like a knife, instantly silencing the room. It has always been my dream to attend UA High School. I plan to take the entrance exam in 10 months. The students stared at him, baffled. And Midoriya, a boy with a long nose, sneered, recovering his composure. You don't have a quirk. There's no way you can pass the hero course exam with just studying. The rules changed a few years ago. Izuku replied cheerfully, unbothered by the insult. Quirkless students are permitted to take the exam, and while I do not possess a quirk, I have been honing my body and my spirit. A hero saves lives with their heart, not just their genetics. Bakugo's desk exploded. He vaulted over his chair, landing directly in front of Izuku's desk, his face contorted in absolute fury. Ever since the incident in the stairwell months ago, Bakugo had avoided Izuku. The memory of being flipped onto his back by a quirkless nobody gnawed at his immense pride. He had convinced himself it was a fluke, a lucky trick, but seeing Izuku sit there, radiating that same bizarre, fearless confidence, made Bakugo's blood boil. Listen here, Deku! Bakugo snarled, slamming his smoking palm onto Izuku's desk. You're worse than the rest of these rejects. You're quirkless. What the hell can you do? You think some martial arts trick is going to let you stand in the same ring as me? Izuku looked up at Bakugo. He saw the anger, the insecurity, and the raw, unpolished talent. Izuku didn't feel intimidated. He felt a profound sense of duty. Kaken! Izuku said loudly, causing Bakugo to flinch slightly. Your explosion quirk is incredibly versatile and powerful. You will undoubtedly make a fantastic hero if you direct your passion toward protecting others. Bakugo blinked, thrown completely off balance by the raw, genuine compliment. What? However, Izuku continued, standing up. He was slightly shorter than Bakugo, but his presence made him feel 10 feet tall. I do not intend to compete with you. I am walking my own path. My only goal is to become a pillar of strength for those who cannot defend themselves. I hope we can both achieve our dreams. Izuku offered a brilliant, unshadowed smile. Bakugo stared at him, his mouth opening and closing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to blast Izuku out the window. But looking into those wide, burning green eyes, Bakugo felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It was the terrifying realization that Izuku Midoriya was completely, utterly immune to his bullying. You cannot intimidate a blazing fire. Whatever, you freak, Bakugo muttered, ripping his hand off the desk and shoving his way out of the classroom as the bell rang. Keep dreaming. You'll end up dead. Izuku watched him go, his smile softening into something more solemn. He has so much fire, Izuku thought, the memories of Kyojuro Rengoku bleeding into his mind. But it is a wild, angry flame. It needs to be tempered. I must watch over him. The walk home was peaceful. Izuku took a shortcut under a large concrete overpass, his mind occupied with his hero analysis notebook. He was writing a new entry on Kamui Woods, noting how the hero's wooden tendrils were susceptible to fire, and theorizing how one might use total concentration breathing to increase the density of wood to make it fire-resistant. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the strange, gurgling sound emanating from the manhole cover behind him. Clank! Izuku stopped, his enhanced senses picking up the subtle shift in air pressure. He turned around, his eyes widening. Rising from the sewers was a massive, amorphous blob of dark green sludge. Two bulbous, yellow eyes swiveled in the liquid mass, locking onto Izuku. A jagged row of teeth formed in the center of the muck. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. Perfect. Before Izuku could react, the villain lunged. The sludge crashed over Izuku like a tidal wave, heavy and suffocating. It forced its way into his mouth, up his nose, cutting off his airway instantly. It smelled like raw sewage and rotting garbage. Don't worry, the villain purred, wrapping tendrils of slime tightly around Izuku's limbs, lifting him off the ground. I'm just hijacking your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over. Thanks for the help. You're my hero. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Izuku's chest. He couldn't breathe. For anyone practicing total concentration, the loss of breath was a death sentence. Without oxygen, the engine dies. The fire goes out. Izuku's hands desperately tore at the sludge covering his mouth, but his fingers simply phased through the liquid, unable to find purchase. I can't breathe, Izuku thought, his vision beginning to edge with black. I need to concentrate. He closed his eyes. He stopped thrashing. He forced his panic down, burying it beneath years of internalized discipline. He had air in his lungs from his last breath. He just needed to compress it, to maximize the oxygen exchange in his bloodstream, to give his muscles the explosive power needed to break free. Izuku tightened his core. The sludge around him began to bubble slightly as his internal body temperature skyrocketed. His muscles bulged, drawing on the absolute dregs of oxygen in his system. He raised his arms, preparing to execute a sweeping, brute force physical strike to scatter the liquid. But before he could unleash the kinetic energy, a voice boomed from the end of the tunnel. "Fear not, kid!" The voice was like thunder. It was a voice Izuku knew better than his own heartbeat. "I am here!" The sludge villain whipped around. Standing at the entrance of the overpass, a grocery bag in one hand, was a mountain of a man, muscular beyond belief, wearing a tight white t-shirt and cargo pants, with two distinctive tufts of blonde hair standing up like rabbit ears. All Might, Texas. All Might reeled his right arm back. The sheer pressure of the air rushing around his fist created a localized gale in the tunnel. Smash! He threw the punch. He didn't even make contact with the villain. The raw, concussive force of the air pressure hit the sludge like a solid wall of concrete. The villain shrieked as its liquid body was violently blown apart, splattering against the walls and ceiling of the underpass. Izuku fell to the ground, gasping violently for air. He coughed up foul-tasting sludge, his lungs burning with a desperate, painful need for oxygen. He took a massive, shuddering breath, the air whistling sharply through his teeth as he automatically fell into a recovery breathing pattern. "Are you all right, young man?" Izuku looked up. All Might was towering over him, his signature, unshadowed smile beaming down. Izuku's heart leapt into his throat. His idol. The man he had idolized since he was a toddler. The symbol of peace. Normally Izuku would have fainted, or stammered out an incomprehensible string of fanboy gibberish. But the soul of a Hashira demanded respect and stoicism. Izuku scrambled to his feet, ignoring the burning in his throat. He stood at perfect attention and bowed flawlessly at a 90-degree angle. "I am perfectly fine," Izuku shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the tunnel. "Thank you for saving my life, All Might. Your strike was flawless." The air pressure alone was enough to disperse a liquid enemy. Truly incredible. All Might blinked, taken aback by the boy's sheer volume and terrifyingly good posture. He had expected a crying teenager, not a kid who sounded like a military drill instructor. "Ah. Well. Yes." All Might boomed back, laughing heartily. "I'm glad you're unharmed. I must apologize for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. I made a mistake and let him escape the sewers, but the situation is resolved." All Might held up two large plastic soda bottles. Inside, the sludge villain was crammed tightly, unconscious. All Might tapped the bottles. "Now I must bring this fellow to the authorities. Stay safe, young man." All Might crouched, preparing to leap. "Wait!" Izuku called out. He didn't want an autograph. He didn't want a picture. But looking at All Might, Izuku's enhanced senses picked up something deeply wrong. Beneath the overwhelming aura of strength, Izuku smelled blood, old blood, and the distinct, coppery scent of failing organs. His eyes, trained by the memories of countless battles, noticed a slight, imperceptible wheeze in All Might's breathing. He had to know. The question that had defined his early life still lingered, and he needed the man at the pinnacle of this world to answer it. As All Might leapt into the air, moving like a ballistic missile, Izuku didn't think. He acted on pure instinct. He channeled total concentration into his legs and jumped, grabbing onto All Might's leg just as he cleared the overpass. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" All Might yelled, soaring thousands of feet above the city. "Hey, kid! Let go! This is too much fanboying. You'll fall. If I let go now, I will certainly die." Izuku roared over the rushing wind, his grip like iron. "Right. Okay. Just close your eyes and hold on." They landed with a heavy thud on the roof of a 3-story office building. Izuku released All Might's leg, his knees wobbling slightly from the sheer adrenaline of the flight. "Good grief," All Might sighed, wiping a speck of blood from his lip. turning away. If you knock on the door, someone will let you down. I have to go. Please wait, Izuku said, taking a step forward. I have a question for you, All Might. A very important one. No time. The villain must be delivered. Can a person without a quirk become a hero? The words echoed across the empty rooftop. All Might stopped walking. Can someone without a genetic gift stand on the same stage as you, and protect people with a blazing heart? Izuku asked, his voice filled with an earnest, unyielding intensity. I was born quirkless. People told me to give up. But I discovered a different kind of strength within myself. I want to know if the symbol of peace believes it is possible. All Might looked back over his shoulder. He saw the fire in the boy's eyes. It was a beautiful, inspiring sight. But suddenly, a violent spasm racked All Might's body. He groaned in agony, coughing violently. A massive cloud of white steam erupted from his body, obscuring him completely. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't scream. He simply narrowed his eyes, analyzing the situation. When the steam cleared, the towering, muscular god was gone. In his place stood an emaciated, skeletal man with sunken eyes and clothes that hung off his fragile frame like a scarecrow. To a normal teenager, this would have been a world-shattering revelation. But Izuku merely observed. I see, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a normal, calm volume. He stepped forward. A severe traumatic injury. Your breathing is heavily compromised. Your lung capacity is operating at perhaps a third of its normal volume. And a missing stomach? Toshinori Yagi stared at the boy, utterly flabbergasted. How did you? Who are you? I can hear it in your breathing, Izuku said softly. The rhythm is fractured. You are fighting a tremendous amount of pain just to stand up. Toshinori sighed, a bitter, bloody smile crossing his skeletal face. He sat down heavily against the railing. You're sharp, kid. Yeah. This is the truth behind the symbol of peace. A villain did this to me 5 years ago. Half my respiratory organs destroyed. My stomach removed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. Toshinori lifted his shirt, revealing a massive, gnarled, spiderweb-like scar covering the entire left side of his torso. It looked like the epicenter of a horrific explosion. Izuku felt a sharp, phantom pain in his own solar plexus. The memory of Akaza's fist tearing through his chest flared, but he pushed it down. He looked at All Might's wound with profound respect. You fought a terrifying demon, Izuku said, bowing his head slightly. And you survived to continue protecting the innocent. You have my deepest respect, All Might. Toshinori was taken aback by the boy's phrasing, but continued. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes, and to trick the fear inside of me. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains just can't be beaten without power. He looked directly into Izuku's eyes, his expression solemn and heavy. So no. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. If you want to help people, become a police officer. They get mocked, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, young man, but you have to consider what's realistic. The silence on the roof was heavy. Toshinori expected the boy to cry. He expected the light in his eyes to die, just as it had in so many others when faced with the harsh, unforgiving reality of the world. Instead, Izuku stood up straight. He brushed off his school uniform. Then he smiled. It wasn't a smile of denial, nor was it the fragile, breaking smile of someone masking their pain. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying certainty. I understand your reasoning, All Might, Izuku declared, his voice booming across the rooftop once again. Toshinori jumped slightly at the sudden volume. You have suffered greatly, and you know the horrors of battle better than anyone. Izuku continued, his emerald eyes burning with an undeniable fire. I thank you for your honesty, and for your concern for my safety. Izuku bowed deeply, holding it for a respectful 3 seconds before snapping back upright. However, I must respectfully disagree with you. Toshinori's jaw dropped. Why you disagree? Yes. Izuku placed a hand over his heart. A quirk is merely a tool. Like a sword or a shield. What defines a hero is not the tool they wield, but the heart that wields it. If I do not have a quirk, I will forge my body into a blade. I will become a pillar for the weak, quirk or no quirk. I will prove to you that human resolve can overcome any obstacle. With that, Izuku bowed one last time. Please, take care of your health, All Might. Farewell. Izuku turned and opened the rooftop access door, disappearing down the stairwell, leaving Toshinori Yagi staring at the empty space, utterly stunned. Toshinori looked down at his scarred, trembling hands. For the first time in 5 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of his impending death felt just a little bit lighter. What a strange, loud kid, Toshinori muttered, a genuine chuckle escaping his lips. He reached into his cargo pants to check on the captured villain. His pockets were empty. Panic seized him. He patted himself down frantically. The bottles. Where were the bottles? He looked over the edge of the building, his heart sinking. During his mid-air struggle with the boy, they must have slipped out. Suddenly, the deafening roar of a massive explosion echoed from the shopping district a few blocks away. A plume of black smoke billowed into the sky. Toshinori's blood ran cold. Izuku was halfway down the street when he heard the explosion. He didn't run away. He ran toward it. The instincts of a Hashira demanded that he seek out the danger. As he rounded the corner of the Tatooine shopping district, he was met with a scene of absolute chaos. The alleyway was engulfed in flames. Buildings were shattered. A large crowd of onlookers was held back by yellow police tape. In the center of the inferno was the sludge villain. It had grown massively in size, a towering, monstrous wave of muck and debris. It must have dropped when I grabbed All Might, Izuku realized, a brief flash of guilt hitting him. This is my fault. He pushed his way to the front of the crowd, observing the situation. The pro-heroes were already on the scene, but they were doing absolutely nothing. Death Arms, a hero with immense physical strength, was punching uselessly at the sludge, unable to grasp it. Kamui Woods was holding back the crowd, unable to approach due to the raging fires that would ignite his wooden body. Empty Lady was standing outside the narrow alley, unable to squeeze her giant form inside. We can't do anything, Death Arms yelled, coughing on the smoke. He's taken a hostage. And the hostage has a strong quirk. He's using it to keep us back. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Izuku narrowed his eyes, peering through the smoke and flames. Trapped within the center of the sludge villain was a boy. He was thrashing violently, unleashing massive, desperate explosions from his palms in a futile attempt to break free. But the explosions only fueled the fires around them, causing more damage. Through the viscous, shifting muck, Izuku saw the hostage's face. It was Katsuki Bakugo. His crimson eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He was suffocating. He was dying. Izuku looked at the pro-heroes. They were hesitating. They were waiting for a better quirk. They were waiting for an ideal situation. Fools, Izuku thought, his internal fire flaring to life. A hero does not wait. A hero acts. Before his conscious mind could even process the decision, Izuku's body moved. He ducked under the yellow police tape and sprinted directly into the inferno. Hey! Kid! Stop! Kamui Woods yelled, reaching out with a wooden tendril, but Izuku was already too fast. Deku? Bakugo gurgled, seeing the green-haired boy charging toward him through the flames. You again? The sludge villain roared, recognizing Izuku. I'll kill you this time. I'll snap your neck. Izuku didn't listen. His mind was completely clear. He fell into a state of absolute, perfect concentration. The chaos around him, the screaming crowd, the roaring flames, the panicked heroes, faded into a dull, distant hum. He needed a weapon. His eyes darted across the battlefield. One of Bakugo's stray explosions had shattered a steel street lamp. A heavy, 3-foot-long segment of the iron pipe lay on the ground, its edges jagged and sharp. Izuku slid on the ash-covered pavement, scooping up the iron pipe. It was heavier than his wooden bakken, but the weight felt right. It felt like a sword. He stood up, gripping the pipe with both hands. He widened his stance, lowering his center of gravity. The sludge villain reared back, unleashing a massive, whip-like tendril of hardened muck directly at Izuku's head. Izuku closed his eyes. He inhaled. It was a breath so deep, so powerful, that the flames around him actually flickered and drew toward him, as if he were a vacuum consuming the oxygen in the alleyway. He visualized the air entering his lungs, igniting into a roaring, golden fire. The heat spread from his core, rushing through his veins, supercharging his muscle fibers, his kinetic vision, his reaction time. His core body temperature spiked to nearly 105 degrees. Sweat instantly vaporized off his skin. He opened his eyes. They were glowing with an ethereal, brilliant light. Total concentration breathing. The sludge whip descended. Flame breathing. Izuku kicked off the ground. The concrete beneath his sneakers cratered, cracking under the explosive force of his leap. He didn't just run. He moved like a ballistic projectile. First form. He closed the distance instantly, slipping under the heavy sludge whip. He brought the iron pipe back, his muscles coiling like a steel spring. The sheer kinetic energy, combined with the extreme heat radiating from his body and the ambient flames of the alley, created a terrifying phenomenon. As Izuku swung the iron pipe, the oxygen around the metal ignited. Unknowing fire, he unleashed a massive, horizontal slash. It wasn't an illusion. A legitimate, roaring arc of golden-red flame trailed behind the iron pipe. The strike connected with the sludge villain's liquid body. But Izuku wasn't aiming for the sludge. His Hashira battle sense pinpointed the enemy's vital weakness. He aimed for the eyes. The burning iron pipe slashed across the villain's bulbous yellow eye. The intense heat of the strike cauterized the liquid membrane, causing an explosive burst of steam. Galaha! The sludge villain shrieked in absolute agony, its grip on Bakugo loosening instantly. Izuku didn't stop. Using the momentum of his slash, he spun, dropping his pipe to grab Bakugo by the collar of his uniform. With a powerful, singular heave, Izuku yanked Bakugo completely out of the sludge, throwing them both backward, away from the villain and onto the hot pavement. The crowd was dead silent. The pro-heroes were frozen in shock. A quirkless teenager had just generated a wave of fire with a broken pipe and rescued the hostage in a fraction of a second. Izuku scrambled to his feet, standing protectively in front of a coughing, gasping Bakugo. Izuku picked his pipe back up, pointing it at the shrieking villain, his breathing heavy but controlled. "Do not fear, Kaken!" Izuku bellowed, his voice ringing out with unshakable confidence. "I am here." Bakugo stared at Izuku's back. He saw the scorched uniform, the trail of smoke rising from the iron pipe, and the unbreakable, mountainous posture of the boy he had mocked his entire life. For the first time, Bakugo didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, overwhelming sense of awe. The sludge villain recovered, its remaining eye burning with hatred. "I'll tear you to pieces. Both of you!" The villain surged forward, a massive, overwhelming wave of sludge intended to crush them both. Izuku tightened his grip on the pipe, preparing to unleash another form. But before he could take a breath, a colossal shadow fell over them. "I am pathetic." Toshinori Yagi, in his muscular all-might form, stepped in front of Izuku and Bakugo. Blood was leaking from the corner of his mouth, his time limit pushed far past its absolute breaking point, but his eyes were blazing with a fire that perfectly mirrored Izuku's. "I told you what makes a hero, young man," All Might said, looking back at Izuku with a massive grin. "But I failed to live up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That is the true test of a hero." All Might grabbed the villain's descending tendrils, ripping them apart with his bare hands. He drew his right arm back. The muscles bulged to an absurd degree. "Detroit." He threw the punch downward. Smash! The air pressure from the strike was apocalyptic. It hit the alleyway like a localized hurricane. The sludge villain was instantly obliterated, scattered into a million harmless droplets against the walls. But the force of the punch didn't stop there. The sheer updraft of air shot into the sky, piercing the heavy clouds above. A moment later, raindrops began to fall, extinguishing the fires in the alleyway. All Might had changed the weather with a single punch. Izuku stood there, the rain cooling his overheated body. He lowered the iron pipe, letting out a long, slow exhale. The golden glow faded from his eyes. He looked at All Might, a massive, joyful smile breaking across his face. He truly is the strongest, Izuku thought. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and police sirens. The pro-heroes had gathered the scattered sludge, securing the villain properly this time. Bakugo was surrounded by medics and pro-heroes, being praised for his resilience and his powerful quirk. Izuku, however, was currently the target of a stern dressing down. Kamui Woods and Death Arms stood over him, looking incredibly annoyed. Do you have any idea how reckless that was? Death Arms shouted. You could have been killed. There was absolutely no reason for a civilian, especially a quirkless kid with a metal pipe, to charge into a hostage situation. You got lucky, Kamui Woods nodded in agreement. We had the situation contained. You only made it more volatile. Leave the hero work to the pros, kid. Instead of looking down or apologizing nervously, Izuku snapped to attention. He stood perfectly straight, his chest puffed out, and looked the pro-heroes directly in the eye. Yes. Izuku boomed, causing both heroes to flinch backward. I apologize for interfering with your official duties. It was reckless of me to charge in without a plan. The heroes blinked. They weren't used to being agreed with so loudly. However, Izuku continued, his smile never faltering. A citizen was suffocating in front of you, and you were waiting for a better opportunity. A true hero does not wait for the perfect moment to save a life, they make the moment perfect through their actions. I could not stand by and let someone die while I had the power to move. Death Arms opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. He looked at the boy's earnest, unyielding expression. The kid was right. They had hesitated. And this quirkless teenager had acted. Just, go home, kid, Death Arms muttered, rubbing his temples, feeling a deep sense of shame. And leave the pipes on the street. Izuku bowed deeply. Thank you for your hard work today. As Izuku walked away from the scene, the evening sun casting long shadows across the wet pavement, he heard footsteps running up behind him. Deku! Izuku turned. Bakugo was standing a few feet away, panting, his hands balled into tight fists. He looked conflicted, angry, and strangely vulnerable. Listen to me, you damn nerd, Bakugo sneered, though the heat behind his words was gone. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't need you to save me. I was totally fine. Don't you dare think you can look down on me now. I owe you nothing. He turned on his heel and stomped away. Izuku watched him go, his wide smile softening into a fond chuckle. Of course, Kaken. Have a safe walk home. Izuku continued his walk, his muscles aching with the pleasant exhaustion of a battle well fought. He was looking forward to Inko's dinner. He was incredibly hungry. I am here. All Might suddenly slid out from a side alley, blocking Izuku's path. In a puff of steam, he reverted to his skeletal form, coughing slightly, blood dripping from his chin. Izuku stopped, bowing respectfully. All Might. It is good to see you recovered. Kid, keep your voice down, Toshinori chuckled, wiping his mouth. I came here to thank you. And to apologize. Izuku stood up straight, tilting his head. Apologize? If you hadn't told me about your convictions on that roof, if you hadn't charged in there to save your friend, I would have been a worthless bystander, Toshinori said, his voice heavy with emotion. I reprimanded you for not being realistic. But you proved me wrong. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's eyes widened slightly. That was true for you today, wasn't it? Toshinori asked. Izuku remembered the sensation. The complete absence of thought. The pure, overwhelming instinct to protect. Yes, Izuku answered, his voice quiet, for the very first time. Toshinori stepped forward, placing a hand over his own heart. You can become a hero, Izuku Midoriya. You have the heart of a true champion. And because of that, I deem you worthy of inheriting my power. Izuku blinked. Inherit your power? But your quirk is strength. It cannot be passed on. That is what the public believes, Toshinori smiled. My quirk is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation. It is called One for All. It cultivates power, and it is given to those who possess a heart of justice. I want you to be my successor. It was the ultimate offer. The dream of millions of children around the world. The power of the symbol of peace, handed to a quirkless boy on a silver platter. Izuku stood in silence. The wind rustled through the trees lining the street. He looked at All Might, feeling the immense weight of the offer, the legacy of the torch. Then, Izuku Midoriya placed his hands on his hips, threw his head back, and laughed. It was a loud, booming, joyous laugh that echoed down the quiet street. Toshinori stared, entirely confused. Izuku looked back at All Might, his smile brighter than the sun. He brought his feet together, and bowed flawlessly at a 90-degree angle. I am honored beyond words, All Might. Izuku shouted, his voice echoing with unbreakable resolve. To be offered such a sacred duty by the hero I admire most is a gift I will cherish forever. He snapped back upright, his eyes burning with an intense, golden-red fire. But I must respectfully decline. Toshinori stumbled backward, coughing in pure shock. Why you decline? Why? This is the greatest power in the world, because my soul already has a flame to tend to, Izuku declared, placing a hand firmly over his chest. I have remembered who I am. I am the reincarnation of a pillar. My power does not come from a quirk, but from the discipline of my breath and the strength of my will. Izuku stepped forward, looking All Might directly in the eyes. If I accept your power, I would be abandoning my own path. I must prove to the world that true strength can be forged by anyone with an unyielding spirit. I will become a hero with my own 2 hands, All Might. I will set my heart ablaze. Toshinori Yagi stood paralyzed, looking at the boy before him. He didn't see a quirkless kid anymore. He saw a titan, a warrior whose spirit was so vast, so incredibly intense, that it dwarfed the necessity of a quirk entirely. Toshinori couldn't help it. He smiled, a genuine, wide smile that reached his sunken eyes. You are truly extraordinary, Izuku Midoriya, Toshinori said softly. Very well. I will watch your path with great interest. Show the world the fire within you. I will. Thank you, All Might. Izuku bowed one final time, turned, and marched down the street toward his home, his back straight, his steps purposeful. He didn't need one for all. He had total concentration. He had his memories. He had his unyielding duty. The UA entrance exam was 10 months away. Izuku took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, feeling the fire burn hot and bright in his chest. It was time to forge the blade. To master a sword, one must first master the body. To master the body, one must first master the breath. This was the core philosophy of the flame Hashira, a truth etched into the very marrow of Izuku Midoriya's soul. The human body was a fragile vessel, easily broken by the monstrous forces of the world. But oxygen was the divine bridge between the physical and the spiritual. By forcing the lungs to expand beyond their natural limits, by hyperoxygenating the blood and accelerating the heart rate, a human could temporarily shatter their biological ceiling. However, Izuku was not satisfied with a temporary shattered ceiling. He needed it gone entirely. He needed to achieve total concentration, constant. The 10 months preceding the UA entrance exam became a crucible of agonizing, glorious self-destruction and rebirth. Izuku did not have a master to guide him in this life. He only had the ghostly memories of Kyojuro Rengoku, the phantom sensation of a blade in his hands, and a burning, unyielding will. His training ground was Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Once a beautiful coastline, it had devolved into an illegal dumping ground, a mountain range of rusted refrigerators, crushed cars, and shattered glass. It was a scar on the city, ignored by heroes and civilians alike. To Izuku, it was the perfect forge. On the first day of his 10-month deadline, Izuku stood before a rusted, waterlogged pickup truck half buried in the sand. He closed his eyes. He planted his feet into the wet sand, feeling the grit between his toes. He took a breath. It wasn't a normal breath. It was a vicious, demanding intake of air that caused his lungs to scream in protest. He envisioned the oxygen traveling down his trachea, igniting like a furnace in his diaphragm, and pumping golden, fiery energy into his limbs. His core temperature skyrocketed. The sweat on his brow instantly turned to steam. First for the community. Second for the soul. Izuku bellowed to the empty beach, his voice echoing over the crashing waves. He dug his hands under the rusted bumper of the truck. His muscles, unaccustomed to the sheer output of total concentration, groaned. Tendons pulled taut, feeling as though they might snap. But Izuku did not stop breathing. Push the air. Feed the fire. With a deafening roar of grinding metal and shifting sand, Izuku lifted the back end of the truck. He dragged it backward, step by agonizing step, toward the cleanup zone he had designated by the street. By the end of the first week, Izuku coughed up blood. Maintaining total concentration breathing while performing extreme physical labor was akin to running an engine on rocket fuel without a cooling system. His capillaries were bursting under the immense blood pressure. His lungs felt as though they were filled with broken glass. He would collapse on the sand, gasping, his body convulsing as it desperately tried to regulate itself. But Izuku simply smiled at the sky. "Wonderful!" he shouted, though it came out as a ragged, bloody wheeze. "My body is learning! Tomorrow, I will pull 2 trucks." As the months bled into autumn, the Midoriya household adapted to the profound changes in its youngest resident. Inko Midoriya was a woman of simple pleasures and deep anxieties. For 10 years, her greatest fear was that her son would be crushed by the cruel, quirk-obsessed world. Now, her greatest fear was that she wouldn't be able to buy enough rice to sustain him. Izuku's metabolism had become a black hole. To repair the massive muscular micro-tears and sustain his elevated body temperature, he required an absurd caloric intake. Dinner time had transformed from a quiet, somewhat melancholic affair into a boisterous, theatrical event. Inko placed a massive, steaming bowl of katsudon on the table, alongside 3 large grilled mackerel, a mountain of white rice, and a bowl of sweet potato stew. Izuku sat at the table, his posture so perfectly straight it looked as if a steel rod was fused to his spine. He clasped his hands together, bowing his head deeply. "Thank you for the meal, Mother. Your cooking is the light of this household." "You're welcome, sweetie," Inko smiled, sitting across from him. "Just try to chew your food carefully, okay?" Izuku picked up his chopsticks. He took a massive bite of the katsudon, practically inhaling a quarter of the bowl in one go. His eyes went wide, sparkling with an intense, unadulterated joy. "You may I." The shout rattled the hanging light fixture above the table. Inko jumped slightly, holding a hand to her chest. Izuku took a bite of the mackerel. "You may I." He scooped a massive spoonful of the sweet potato stew. "You may I." "Mother, this stew is magnificent. The sweetness of the potato perfectly balances the savory broth." "You may I." I'm glad you like it." Izuku, Inko laughed softly, watching her son devour enough food to feed a family of 4 in under 10 minutes. Despite the sheer volume and the bizarre shouting, Inko felt a profound sense of peace. Izuku was happy. He was glowing. Literally, sometimes, she swore that when he was deeply focused, his skin radiated a comforting, hearth-like warmth. He had filled out too. The scrawny, fragile boy who used to hide behind his yellow backpack was gone. In his place was a young man with broad shoulders, thick, coiled muscles, and hands heavily calloused from relentless labor. "Izuku," Inko asked gently, sipping her tea. "The UA exam is approaching. Are you sure you're allowed to bring a weapon? You've been spending so much time on that wooden sword." Izuku swallowed his final bite of rice. "Yes. UE policy explicitly allows for support items during the practical exam, provided they are declared on the application. As my power is classified as a breathing technique and not a quirk factor, a blade is necessary to channel the kinetic energy." Izuku had spent weeks researching the technicalities of UA's entrance requirements. He had officially registered his abilities under the quirk registry not as a quirk, but as an anomalous physical technique. Dr. Tsubasa had been utterly baffled when Izuku shattered a grip-strength machine in his office without a single trace of an active quirk factor in his blood work. "Well," Inko smiled, "just promise me you won't hurt yourself." "I promise to protect everyone, including myself," Izuku declared, bowing so deeply his forehead touched the table. Month 7. Deep winter. The forging of the body was progressing perfectly. Izuku had managed to maintain total concentration, constant for a full 24 hours, even while sleeping. It was a terrifying milestone. His resting heart rate was higher than a normal athlete's sprinting rate, yet it beat with a slow, heavy, thunderous rhythm. His body heat was so intense that when he exhaled in the freezing winter air, a thick plume of white steam billowed from his lips, completely obscuring his face. But a Hashira was incomplete without a Nichiren blade. Modern laws explicitly forbade civilians from carrying live steel blades, especially minors. A real katana was out of the question. However, Izuku needed a conduit. When he channeled flame breathing, The sheer kinetic friction and heat generated by his swings would splinter and incinerate standard practice swords within minutes. He needed something denser. Something unbreakable. Izuku found his answer at a specialty lumber yard on the outskirts of Mizurufu. He spent all his saved allowance on a single, thick block of lignum vitae, one of the densest, hardest woods on the planet, often called ironwood. It was so heavy it sank in water. For 3 weeks, when he wasn't hauling trash off to Goba Beach, Izuku was carving. He didn't use power tools. He used hand planes, rasps, and sandpaper, treating the creation of the blade as a meditative extension of his breathing. He shaped the bakken to match the exact dimensions of Kyojuro Rengoku's katana. He carved a slight curve into the heavy wood, balancing the weight perfectly just above the hilt. The most important part was the tsuba, the handguard. Izuku found a scrap piece of heavy brass at the beach. He spent days filing it down, shaping it into the distinct, beautiful form of a burning flame. He polished it until it gleamed like gold, then fitted it over the hilt of the ironwood blade, wrapping the handle tightly in traditional white and red cloth. On the first morning of spring, with the UA exam only a month away, Izuku stood on the newly cleared sands of Dagoba Beach. The sun was just rising over the horizon, casting a brilliant, fiery glow across the ocean. Izuku drew his newly forged bakken from his belt. It was heavy. To a normal person, it would feel like swinging a steel crowbar. But to Izuku, it felt like coming home. He widened his stance. He took a deep breath, slipping into total concentration, constant. The air around him rippled with heat. He gripped the hilt with both hands. First form. Izuku stepped forward and swung. Unknowing fire! The ironwood blade cleaved through the morning air. The sheer velocity of the swing, combined with the extreme heat radiating from Izuku's hands, ignited the friction in the air. A brilliant, roaring arc of golden red flame trailed the wooden blade, blasting a wave of scorching heat across the sand, turning a patch of it instantly into glass. Izuku halted the blade perfectly at eye level. The wood did not splinter. It did not burn. It absorbed the heat, glowing faintly with a deep, cherry-red hue before cooling down. Izuku smiled, his eyes burning with the reflection of the rising sun. The blade was forged. 10 months. The morning of the UA entrance exam, the towering, glass-fronted H-shaped building of UA High School loomed over the thousands of hopeful teenagers streaming through its front gates. It was a monument to heroism, the crucible where legends like All Might and Endeavor were forged. Izuku Midoriya stood at the entrance, his yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, his heavy ironwood bakken secured to his left hip in a custom leather scabbard. He wore his black middle school uniform, entirely unbothered by the crisp morning breeze. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the scent of anticipation, nervous sweat, and cherry blossoms. Out of my way, DKU! The familiar, explosive voice came from behind him. Izuku turned smoothly on his heel. Katsuki Bakugo was stalking toward him, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his face locked in a permanent, aggressive scowl. The dynamic between them had shifted drastically over the last 10 months. Bakugo had entirely stopped physically bullying Izuku. The memory of being effortlessly thrown onto his back in the stairwell, and the sight of Izuku generating literal fire with a broken pipe, had created a terrifying cognitive dissonance in Bakugo's mind. He still hated Izuku, perhaps more than ever, but the hatred was now laced with caution. "Good morning, Kaken!" Izuku bellowed cheerfully, bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. "I wish you the best of luck on your exam today. I am certain your explosions will dominate the field." Bakugo flinched slightly at the sheer volume. People around them stopped and stared. "Keep your damn voice down, you freak," Bakugo hissed, marching past him. "Don't think just because you have some weird martial arts trick that you're on my level. I'm going to crush this exam, and I'm going to crush you. I look forward to seeing your growth." Izuku yelled to Bakugo's retreating back. Izuku turned to resume his walk when a sudden gasp caught his attention. A girl with a round face and short brown hair had tripped over her own feet. She was plummeting face first toward the hard concrete pathway. Izuku didn't think. The Hashira instincts fired instantly. He didn't activate a spectacular form. He merely utilized the raw, explosive speed granted by his breathing. In a literal blur of motion, Izuku crossed the 10 feet between them. Before the girl's face was an inch from the ground, a strong, calloused hand caught her by the shoulder, gently but firmly righting her. Ochako Uraraka blinked, entirely disoriented. 1 second she was falling, the next, she was standing upright, supported by a boy with messy green hair and a terrifyingly intense aura of heat. "Whoa there!" Izuku boomed, flashing her a blindingly bright smile. "It would be a terrible tragedy to injure yourself before the exam even begins." "Are you unharmed?" Ochako stared at him, her cheeks dusting with a heavy blush. He was so loud, and his grip felt like warm iron. Yes. I'm fine. I'm sorry I tripped. I was going to use my quirk to catch myself, but you moved so fast. Speed is of the essence when protecting others," Izuku declared proudly, stepping back and giving her a respectful bow. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. It is a pleasure to meet you." "I'm Ochako Uraraka," she replied, smiling nervously. She noticed the wooden sword at his hip. "Are you a samurai or something?" "I am a swordsman," Izuku confirmed loudly. "I wish you the utmost success today, Uraraka. Let us both do our best." Without waiting for a response, Izuku marched toward the auditorium, leaving Ochako staring after him, deeply perplexed but undeniably inspired by his overwhelming confidence. The written exam was trivial. Izuku's mind, disciplined by relentless focus, tore through the academic questions with ease. The real challenge lay in the practical orientation. Thousands of students sat in the massive, darkened auditorium. On the brightly lit stage stood the voice hero, Present Mike, projecting his voice with deafening volume. "Welcome to my live show, everybody. Everybody say hey." Silence. "What a refined response." Present Mike continued seamlessly. "Now, I'll quickly explain the practical exam. You will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles in designated cities. You will be hunting down 3 types of villain robots, worth 1, 2, and 3 points respectively. Use your quirks to earn points." Izuku sat perfectly straight, his hands on his knees, listening intently. Suddenly, a tall, imposing student with glasses stood up in the middle of the auditorium, raising his hand rigidly. "Excuse me, may I ask a question?" the student shouted. A spotlight hit him. On the handout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the top hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of this foolish mistake. We are here because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. The student suddenly turned, pointing an accusing finger directly at Izuku. "And you?" The boy with the unkempt green hair and the wooden toy sword. Every eye in the auditorium turned to Izuku. "You have been sitting with unnerving rigidity this entire time, and your breathing is incredibly loud. It sounds like a whistling kettle. If you are not taking this seriously, or if you plan to play samurai with a toy, leave immediately." The auditorium echoed with quiet snickers. Izuku did not shrink. He stood up. He was at least 4 inches shorter than the spectacled student, but when Izuku stood, the air in the room seemed to shift. The temperature spiked slightly. Izuku looked directly at the accusing student, his emerald eyes burning with utter sincerity. "I apologize if my breathing disturbs you." Izuku's voice boomed across the auditorium, entirely unamplified by a microphone, yet it easily matched Present Mike's volume. Present Mike nearly dropped his script, his jaw dropping behind his sunglasses. "This is my total concentration. It is the source of my power. As for my sword, it is no toy. It is an approved support item, forged to withstand the heat of my flames. I assure you, I am taking this exam more seriously than my own life." Izuku bowed deeply toward the spectacled student. "Thank you for your concern regarding my focus. I wish you the best of luck." Tenya Ida, the spectacled student, was completely thrown off. He had expected the boy to cower or apologize nervously. Instead, he was met with a wall of pure, unadulterated earnestness and a terrifyingly loud voice. "I see," Ida stammered, adjusting his glasses. "I apologize for misjudging your resolve. No apology necessary." Izuku beamed, sitting back down, his posture instantly returning to rigid perfection. On the stage, Present Mike wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "What is up with that kid's vibe?" he thought. "He feels like a pro hero already." "Right," Mike shouted, recovering. To answer examinee 7111's question, the fourth robot is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle. My advice is to run away from it. That's all from me. Plus Ultra. Battle Center B was a massive, sprawling replica of a modern metropolis. Tall buildings, wide streets, and intersections stretched as far as the eye could see. A massive crowd of examinees stood behind the colossal iron gates, stretching and preparing their quirks. Izuku stood at the very front of the pack, his left hand resting casually on the hilt of his ironwood bakken. He closed his eyes, regulating his breathing. In-out. Deep in the flow. Stagnation is death. Movement is life. Ochako Uraraka was a few yards away, looking incredibly nervous. She took a deep breath, trying to hype herself up. Ida stood nearby, analyzing the gate's structure. Izuku opened his eyes. The golden red hue was prominent now. He didn't wait for a buzzer. He didn't wait for President Mick's voice. His Hashira instincts felt the heavy mechanical gears of the gates beginning to disengage. Before the massive doors had even fully parted, Izuku was moving. He drew his bakken in a fluid, lightning-fast motion. He kicked off the ground with such immense force that a shockwave cracked the pavement beneath his sneakers. He shot through the narrow gap in the opening gates like a fired bullet, leaving a trail of hot wind in his wake. The other examinees gasped, frozen in place. "Hey! That guy is disqualified!" Someone shouted. "The exam hasn't started." From the observation tower speakers, President Mick's voice roared over the city. "What are you waiting for? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The examinee with the sword has the right idea." Panic erupted. The examinees surged forward, pouring into the city. But Izuku was already a ghost. 3 blocks deep into the mock city, a group of 5 one-pointer robots rolled out of an alleyway, their red optics scanning for targets. Target acquired, the lead robot droned, raising a mechanical arm equipped with a blunt projectile launcher. Izuku didn't slow down. He took a massive breath, his chest expanding visibly beneath his uniform. Flame-breathing, he dashed forward, his speed rendering him a mere blur of black and green. First form, unknowing fire. He swung the heavy ironwood blade horizontally. The friction ignited the air. A massive crescent of roaring flame erupted from the wooden blade, crashing into the front 3 robots. The sheer kinetic force of the dents would shatter their armor plating, while the intense heat melted their internal wiring instantly. They exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Without breaking his stride, Izuku pivoted. He gripped the hilt tightly, bringing the blade low. "Wonderful durability!" Izuku shouted cheerfully at the remaining 2 robots. But it is not enough. He launched himself into the air, flipping over the retaliatory fire of the robots. Third form, blazing universe. Izuku brought the heavy blade down in a devastating, sweeping vertical arc. The flaming strike cleaved cleanly through the chassis of the 4th robot, and smashed the head unit of the 5th into pulverized scrap metal. He landed softly on his feet, exhaling a plume of steam. 5 points! Izuku declared, immediately dashing down the next street. High above the mock city, in a dark observation room lined with monitors, the faculty of UA High watched in stunned silence. Nizu, the principal, sat at the front, his paw stroking his chin. Midnight, President Mike, Sniper, and Eraserhead stared at the screen tracking examinee Midoriya. "What the hell is that quirk?" Vlad King asked, leaning forward. "Fire generation? But he's using a wooden sword. Is he coating the sword in fire?" Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, narrowed his tired eyes, zooming in on Izuku's vitals on his tablet. "It's not a quirk. I looked at his file. He's registered as quirkless. The ability is listed as total concentration breathing." "Quirkless?" Midnight gasped. "That's impossible. He just generated a literal wave of fire with a piece of wood." "Look at his heat signature," Aizawa noted, pointing at the thermal camera feed. Izuku on the screen was glowing bright white, far hotter than any normal human should be able to survive. His core temperature is absurdly high. He's hyperoxygenating his blood to drastically increase his physical output. The fire isn't magical. It's pure, weaponized friction and kinetic energy, ignited by the heat of his own body and the density of his weapon. "Fascinating," Nizu murmured, his beady eyes gleaming. to bypass the genetic lottery through sheer, unadulterated discipline and willpower. He possesses the spirit of a true warrior. In the back of the room, standing in the shadows, Toshinori Yagi, All Might, watched the monitor with a massive, proud smile. Show them, young Midoriya, he thought. Show them the fire that doesn't need a quirk. Down in the city, Izuku was a one-man natural disaster. He moved with a grace and ferocity that left the other examinees utterly bewildered. Ida watched in shock as Izuku vaulted off a lamppost, using first form to decapitate a three-pointer before it could even lock on. Izuku didn't just destroy the robots. He dismantled them with surgical precision, leaving clean, cauterized cuts in the thick metal armor. And through it all, his booming voice echoed through the streets. Excellent kick, examinee! Izuku shouted as he ran past the boy who had just destroyed a two-pointer. Maintain your balance on the landing. He was at 65 points. He had lost track of time, lost in the rhythm of the battle, the beautiful dance of breath and blade. He felt no fatigue. The flames sustained him. Suddenly, the ground beneath him violently shuddered. It wasn't a small tremor. It was a massive, localized earthquake. The windows of the mock buildings shattered. At the end of the main avenue, a colossal shadow eclipsed the sun, the zero-pointer. It was a monstrous, towering behemoth, easily the size of a skyscraper. Its massive treads crushed buildings into dust as it rolled forward. It raised a gargantuan fist and slammed it into the street, sending a shockwave of debris flying in all directions. Panic consumed the examinees. Run! Are you kidding me? That thing is huge. There's no point in fighting it. Run away! The students turned and fled en masse, a stampede of terrified teenagers desperately trying to escape the mechanical titan's path. Izuku stopped running. He stood in the center of the avenue, sheathing his ironwood blade back into its scabbard. He looked up at the towering monstrosity. He analyzed the situation instantly. It was slow. It was bulky. It was entirely unnecessary to fight it to pass the exam. Logic dictated retreat. But as Izuku turned to follow the crowd, a sound pierced through the chaos of grinding metal and screaming students. A sharp cry of pain. Izuku whipped his head around. Near the base of the zero-pointer, half buried under a massive chunk of concrete rubble, was the girl from the entrance. Uraraka. She was desperately trying to push the rubble off her trapped leg, looking up in sheer terror as the colossal tread of the zero-pointer rolled closer. She was going to be crushed. The other students were running away. Ida paused, looking back, his face torn with indecision, before fear took over and he took a step back. Izuku did not hesitate. He did not think about points. He did not think about passing or failing. He saw a life in danger, and the fire in his soul roared to life. Izuku drew his blade, threw his head back, and inhaled. It was the deepest breath he had taken in his life. The air whistling through his teeth sounded like a screaming jet engine. The thermal cameras in the observation room went entirely white around his figure. The concrete beneath his feet literally began to melt from the ambient heat radiating off his body. Total concentration breathing, constant. Pushed past the limit. Ignite the soul. Izuku shot forward. He didn't run. He exploded across the asphalt. He cleared the 100 yards between him and the zero-pointer in less than 2 seconds. He arrived right beside Uraraka. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her eyes reflecting the terrifying, blinding heat radiating from his body. Do not fear, Uraraka! Izuku bellowed, his voice cutting through the mechanical roar of the robot. I will not let you die. Izuku didn't try to lift the rubble. There was no time. The massive, house-sized fist of the zero-pointer was descending directly toward them, aiming to crush them into the pavement. Izuku bent his knees, lowering his center of gravity to the absolute floor. He gripped the hilt of his ironwood bakken with both hands, pointing the tip toward the ground. Flame breathing. Every muscle fiber in his body contracted simultaneously. Second form. Izuku leaped directly upward, launching himself on a collision course with the descending giant metal fist. As he soared through the air, he unleashed a devastating, upward-sweeping slash. Rising scorching sun. The collision was spectacular. The heavy ironwood blade struck the center of the zero-pointer's fist. The sheer kinetic energy, amplified by the explosive upward momentum, and the raging fire trailing the blade, acted like a massive shape charge. A localized explosion of golden red fire erupted in midair. The heat was so intense it instantly melted the heavy armor plating of the robot's fist. The kinetic force of the upward swing tore through the structural integrity of the arm. With a deafening screech of tearing metal, the massive arm of the zero-pointer was cleanly cleaved in half, the fire traveling up the internal wiring and detonating the main core in the robot's chest. The behemoth froze, massive internal explosions rocking its chassis, before it slowly tilted backward and collapsed into a ruined building, sending a massive plume of dust and smoke into the sky. Silence descended upon Battle Center B. Izuku fell back to the earth. He landed gracefully, bending his knees to absorb the impact. His uniform was heavily singed. His ironwood blade was glowing a terrifying, bright red, smoke billowing from the wood, but it had held together. He took a slow, shuddering exhale, regulating his heart rate before he cooked himself alive. The other examinees, who had stopped running to watch the spectacle, were frozen in absolute awe. A quirkless boy with a wooden stick had just one-shot a building-sized robot. Ida stared, his jaw completely unhinged. Izuku sheathed his smoking blade. He turned to Uraraka. Without a word, he dug his hands under the massive concrete slab trapping her leg and, with a loud grunt, heaved it off her. He knelt beside her, his terrifyingly intense persona softening slightly. "Are you severely injured? Can you stand?" My ankle is sprained," she whispered, looking at him as if he were a god descended from the heavens. You saved me." "Thank you." Izuku offered her a massive, blinding smile. "It is the duty of the strong to protect." "I am just glad you are safe," a loud buzzer echoed across the city. "Time's up," Present Mix's voice announced. Izuku stood up, offering Uraraka his hand. He gently helped her up, letting her lean her weight against him. He looked around at the destroyed city, the shattered robots, and the stunned faces of his peers. He felt a deep, resonating ache in his muscles, and his lungs felt raw, but his heart was soaring. He had done his duty. A week later, Izuku sat at his small desk in his bedroom, staring at the holographic projector disc that had arrived in the mail. Inko stood nervously in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Izuku, open it." Izuku nodded. He pressed the button. A holographic projection of All Might materialized in the center of the room. "I am here as a projection." All Might boomed. "All Might!" Izuku shouted back respectfully, sitting at perfect attention. The holographic All Might chuckled. "Young Midoriya, you did something truly unprecedented during the practical exam. You scored a respectable 65 villain points." All Might paused, his expression turning serious and profoundly respectful. "But the UA exam is not just about destroying villains. It is about heroism. The faculty watched you throw away your chance at survival, ignoring the rules of the test, to save a fellow examinee who was trapped. You didn't hesitate. You acted exactly as a true hero should." A scoreboard appeared next to All Might. Izuku Midoriya. Rescue points, 60. For a grand total of 125 points. You passed the exam in first place. Izuku stared at the number. First place. Beating Bakugo. Beating everyone. With nothing but a piece of wood and the air in his lungs. "You refused my power, young man," All Might said softly, his smile radiant. "And you proved that you didn't need it. You have forged your own blade, and your fire burns brighter than anything I have ever seen. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your hero academia." The hologram faded. Inko burst into tears, rushing forward and throwing her arms around Izuku's neck. "Izuku! You did it! You're going to UA!" Izuku wrapped his strong arms around his mother. He looked at the ironwood bokken resting against the wall. "Yes, mother," Izuku said softly, his voice trembling just a fraction with emotion. "I am going to be a hero." He closed his eyes, feeling the gentle, comforting warmth in his chest. "I will not let you down, All Might," Izuku thought. "I will become the pillar this world needs. I will keep my heart ablaze."